Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is August 16th. On this day in 1982, 20-year-old Maggie Hume, a bright, dependable young woman, was murdered in Battle Creek, Michigan. What began as a concern over a missed shift quickly became one of Michigan's most haunting cold cases. Today, we're discussing the murder of Maggie Hume, a crime that still casts a shadow over the community more than 40 years later. Let's get started. The morning of August 16th, 1982 felt wrong from the very start. Maggie, the daughter of a well-known local football coach, was nothing if not reliable. So when she didn't show up for work, her coworkers knew that something was off. One of them called her boyfriend, Virgil J. Carter, who in turn reached out to Maggie's brother. Together, they went to her apartment to check on her. But once they were inside, things seemed off. Maggie's car keys and glasses, things she'd never leave home without, were right there. The phone was off the hook. The alarm clock was still ringing, frozen at the moment she should have woken up. Even her bed was missing her fitted sheet. It was unsettling for sure, but not yet a crime scene. At least, not until the police were called. At the insistence of Maggie's roommate, Margaret Van Winkle, officers began a more thorough search. That's when they opened the closet. Inside was a snuggle sack sleeping bag. Inside the sleeping bag was Maggie, her neck showing deep, dark marks. She had been strangled. In the space of minutes, the search for a missing young woman had turned into a homicide investigation. And the people who'd walked into her apartment as concerned friends now knew that they were standing in the middle of something far darker than they could have ever imagined. The apartment told its own story, if you knew how to listen. Maggie had been placed carefully in that closet, zipped up inside the sleeping bag and covered with a blanket. Whoever had done this wasn't just killing, they were concealing. The marks on her neck suggested strangulation, possibly with a ribbon or a cord. Nothing had been stolen. Her glasses and car keys sat where she'd left them. And there were no valuables missing from anywhere in the apartment. In fact, it doesn't look as though anyone had even been in the other rooms of the apartment, just her bedroom. Investigators found partial grass-stained footprints leading from the balcony directly to Maggie's bed and then back out again. It was a quiet entry and exit. There had been no rummaging through drawers and no sign of a struggle in other rooms. And here's the chilling part. At the time, only 3 people knew that Maggie would be home alone that night. Herself, her roommate, and her boyfriend. To investigators, it all pointed to someone who knew Maggie's habits, knew her home, and planned for the moment that she'd be alone. Almost immediately, suspicion centered on Jay Carter. He was the last known person to see Maggie alive, and he did tell police that they'd been together and had had sex the night before. Carter claimed that he'd left around 11:30 p.m., but his story shifted. He also let slip details about the crime, like the fact that she'd been strangled with a ligature, and that was something that police hadn't told anyone. Police asked Carter to take a polygraph test, and he failed. But despite this, they didn't have any definitive physical evidence. Sure, his fingerprints were in her apartment, but he was her boyfriend. He also said that they had had consensual sex that night, so any evidence of that was explained away as well. So ultimately, the police had nothing concrete that they were able to hang charges on. And the case went cold. But then, in 1986, a new suspect emerged. Michael Ronning, a convicted murderer from Arkansas, confessed to killing Maggie. At first, he seemed like a viable suspect. He lived in the apartment directly below hers at the time, plus, he was a killer. He told police that he had climbed in through the window to strangle her. So for a moment, it seemed like a breakthrough, but his story ultimately was riddled with errors. He described entering through the window, but investigators knew that the killer had come in through the balcony. He said that she was wrapped in clothing, but she wasn't. And he gave wrong details about another murder entirely. Ronning was written off as a false confessor, someone who is just seeking attention or a change in prison conditions. The case slid back into uncertainty, leaving Maggie's murder in limbo. By 2005, more than 20 years had passed with no resolution. That year, a brand new cold case task force took over. Investigators who had not been involved in the original investigation. They combed through every scrap of evidence, re-interviewed witnesses, and reassessed the case from scratch. And their conclusion? Jay Carter was still the most viable suspect. They even recommended indicting him. But there were problems. Carter's DNA was all over Maggie, but not under her nails. The murder weapon was never found, and the messy history of Ronning's false confession gave defense attorneys plenty to work with. So ultimately, no charges were filed, and the case went cold again. In 2014, authors Blaine Pardo and Victoria Hester released The Murder of Maggie Hume, Cold Case in Battle Creek. Drawing on police files and community interviews, they explored investigative missteps, political infighting, and the lingering emotional toll that the murder has left on the town. Maggie's family has never stopped fighting for answers. Her father once said simply, quote, "I just don't want people to forget," end quote. And they haven't. Each anniversary, her case resurfaces in local newspapers, in podcasts, and in community vigils. The Battle Creek Police Department still keeps her file open, and her picture still appears on cold case boards. The same quiet conviction remains. The truth is out there. And maybe, just maybe, someone will finally decide to speak. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found Maggie's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join us again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!